The massive council chamber stretched out like a metallic cathedral, its walls humming with the quiet energy of 1,000 civilizations. Delegates floated, crawled, or stood in their designated areas, each suited to their unique biology. The artificial gravity shifted subtly between zones to accommodate species that evolved under different stars. Delegate Crix of the Vith Tar ran a crystalline appendage along the smooth surface of her data tablet. Her species resembled living gemstones, their bodies refracting the chamber's light into dancing colors. Today's agenda was routine maintenance, census updates, trade disputes, minor territorial adjustments, nothing that required much thought. Item 47, announced the Xanathi representative, its voice rippling through localized energy fields. The Xanathi had no physical form, existing as patterns of pure energy contained within translucent barriers. Their words came as vibrations in the air, carefully modulated to be understood across species. Sol 3 census verification. The Kesathul delegate, a writhing mass of interconnected organisms speaking with 1,000 voices, responded immediately. Status remains unchanged. No response to standard hails for the past is checking archives, 437 standard cycles, species designation, extinct. A few delegates rustled or chittered, the galactic equivalent of murmurs. Sol 3, better known as Earth, had been a minor concern a millennium ago. The bipedal species there had shown promise, displaying creativity and stubbornness in equal measure. They'd made contact, joined a few trade agreements, sent a delegation or two. Then silence. Predicted outcome confirmed, Delegate Crix noted, her voice creating harmonic overtones that other crystalline beings found reassuring. Aggressive tendencies noted in early contact reports likely led to self-termination. Standard pattern. The chamber's attention had already moved to the next item when reality split open. Admiral Minho pressed his weathered face closer to the viewport, studying the council station as it grew from a distant speck to a sprawling complex of metal and energy. 16 years he'd waited for this moment. 16 years since the decision was made. Since humanity's scattered fleets had cast lots to see who would make the return journey. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion that ran bone deep. The inheritance had traveled further than any human ship before it, carrying the weight of terrible knowledge and desperate hope. Behind him, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency. They were all born in space, raised on ration packs and recycled air. They were the children of Earth's exodus, and for them war was the natural state of existence. Communications Officer Gina looked up from her station, her young face serious. Like most of her generation, she'd grown up to the sound of distant explosions and the hum of weapons charging. Council station responding to our approach, sir. Standard first contact protocols. Minho almost laughed. First contact. As if humanity hadn't sat at that very table 1,000 years ago, making small talk about mineral rights and shipping lanes, as if the last millennium of silence hadn't been notice enough. Let them wonder, he said quietly. Another few minutes. Won't hurt. The inheritance was beautiful in the way that ancient weapons could be beautiful. Its hull bore the scars of 100 battles, patched and repaired so many times that the original hull was more scar than metal. Sections had been rebuilt with materials from a dozen worlds, creating a patchwork that somehow looked deliberate, artistic even. It was 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that no Earth-born human would recognize, powered by technologies that necessity had driven them to develop. Through the viewport, Minho could see the council station's defense platforms turning to track their approach. Cute little things, really. The engineers who'd built them had clearly never seen what a devourer bioship could do to metal and flesh. Sir, Gina's voice held a note of amusement. They're asking for identification and proof of peaceful intent. This time, Minho did laugh, though the sound held no humor. They wanted proof of peaceful intent from a warship that could crack their station like an egg. From humans who'd forgotten what peace meant centuries ago. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of too many years and too many losses. Behind him, the bridge held its breath. Every soul on this ship, every human who'd survived the endless war, had waited for this moment. Open the channel, he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of command and the weariness of time. Let's see how surprised they are. The council chamber erupted in chaos as their screens flickered to life, showing the scarred face of a species they'd declared extinct. Delegate Crix dropped her data tablet, the sound of crystal striking metal ringing like a bell. Admiral Minho smiled, and the galaxy shivered. The warning klaxons started as a low whine and built to a deafening wail. Station personnel scrambled through corridors as emergency lights bathed everything in red. Captain Sora pressed herself against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, her 6 eyes wide with disbelief. The ship that emerged from the hyperspace rift was wrong in every possible way. It didn't conform to any known engineering principles. Its hull curved and twisted like a living thing, yet every line spoke of deliberate design. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the scars of some ancient beast, and it was enormous. "Status report," Sora barked into her comm device. 3,000 meters long. No, wait, recalculating, 3,500 meters. Her sensor. Officer's voice cracked. "Captain, it's still growing. The readings don't make sense." The truth was simpler than their scanners suggested. The inheritance wasn't growing. It was unfolding. Sections of hull slid away to reveal docking bays the size of small cities. Weapons that had remained dormant during travel extended like the wings of some mechanical predator. This wasn't just a ship. It was a traveling fortress, a mobile world born of necessity and war. Chief Engineer Dongyun ran his hands over the ancient console, feeling the familiar vibrations through his palms. Every bolt, every wire, every jury-rigged connection had a story. He'd been born on this ship, as had his father before him. 3 generations of his family had kept the inheritance flying, patching hull breaches and replacing worn components with whatever materials they could find. "Fusion core holding, steady at 93%, he called out, his voice carrying over the bridge noise. "Jump drives are spooling down normal, gravitational generators holding." He paused, running through mental calculations. "She's tired, Admiral, but she'll hold." The gravitational generators were a human innovation born from desperation. When the Devourer's bioships proved immune to conventional weapons, humanity had learned to weaponize physics itself. The massive cores that powered the inheritance weren't just for propulsion. They were an announcement. Humanity had learned to bend reality to their will. Navigator Sunmi double-checked their position against star charts that were older than most civilizations. The Galactic Center wasn't exactly dangerous, but it was complex. Trade routes, patrol schedules, diplomatic channels, all the intricate dance of a peaceful galaxy. "Coordinates confirmed," she announced, allowing herself a small smile. "We're exactly where we need to be." Council station bearing 09 Mark 5 distance closing. She'd spent 6 years calculating this jump. 6 years running simulations, accounting for gravitational drift, stellar movement, the expansion of space itself. They'd only get one chance to arrive at exactly the right place and time. Too early, and their warnings would be dismissed. Too late, and the warnings would be unnecessary. Through the station's viewing ports, delegates pressed close to watch the impossible ship. The Vithatar delegates whispered among themselves in crystalline chimes. Their mathematical minds struggled to comprehend the ship's contradictory readings. Gravitational sensors showed a mass that should collapse under its own weight. Energy readings suggested power levels that should tear the ship apart. The ship's hull told a different story to those who knew how to read it. Each patch was a battle, survived. Each smooth section was a complete rebuild after catastrophic damage. The metal itself was scarred and pitted, but it was also reinforced, strengthened, evolved. This wasn't just a warship. It was a species' entire civilization, distilled into one terrible instrument of survival. A junior delegate, a young Kesethal cluster barely old enough to have its own voice, pointed with a trembling appendage. "The engine signatures, they're not in our databases." The senior delegates fell silent. The Galactic Council maintained records going back millions of years. Every species, every innovation, every technology that had ever sailed between the stars was catalogued and stored. For something to exist, without record meant one of two things. It was older than memory, or it had developed beyond their knowledge. Warning lights continued to flash throughout the station. Emergency protocols activated automatically, shields powered up to maximum. Defense platforms tracked the newcomer with weapons that suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. The Council's greatest dreadnoughts moved to intercept, their crews staring at screens that showed a ship that shouldn't exist. Admiral Minho stood at the center of his ship's bridge, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a military operation. Officers called out reports. Technicians ran diagnostics. Marines stood at ready positions, their weapons modified with technologies that would have baffled the galaxy's greatest weapons designers. But Minho's attention was on the viewing screen, showing the Council station. The place looked exactly as he remembered from ancient records. Peaceful, prosperous, utterly unprepared. "Signal from the station, sir," Gina reported. "They're demanding immediate identification and statement of intent." The bridge fell quiet. 1,000 years of war had led to this moment. The last hope of two species, humanity and the galaxy they'd protected without recognition, hung in the balance. Minho nodded once. It was time to remind the galaxy what they'd forgotten. The massive view screen flickered to life, showing a face that shouldn't exist. Admiral Minho looked older than Starlight itself, his grey hair cropped short in military fashion. Scars crossed his weathered skin like a map of battles fought and won, but his eyes burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed even after 1,000 years of war. "I am Admiral Minho of the Terran Expeditionary Command," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned council chamber. Each word was measured, deliberate. "We bring warnings from the void between stars." The silence stretched impossibly long. Every delegate, from crystalline Vithtar to energy-based Xanathi, remained frozen. Their translators worked overtime, checking and rechecking the impossible words. Human, living, speaking. Delegate Crix was the first to recover, her crystalline form chiming as she spoke. "You claim to be human, but your species vanished centuries ago. We declared you extinct." A smile ghosted across Minho's scarred face, not pleasant, but not quite cruel either. The smile of someone who had heard all the universe's jokes and found none of them funny. "We didn't vanish," he said simply. "We went to war." At his side, Lieutenant Hyuna moved with practiced efficiency. She was young by human standards, perhaps 30 years old, but her eyes held the same hard wisdom as her admiral's. Her hands danced across holographic controls, and suddenly the chamber filled with star charts. The map showed the galaxy as the Council knew it: trade routes, patrol sectors, diplomatic boundaries. Then it expanded, showing dark spaces beyond the galactic rim, spaces that should have been empty. "The Devourer fleets came from the void beyond our galaxy," Minho continued. His voice remained steady, but something in it made the delegates lean forward. "We've held them back for 1,000 years." With a gesture from Hyuna, the star charts came alive. Battle icons appeared like spreading cancer. Red markers showed human forward positions, black markers showed Devourer advance routes. And between them, a line that writhed and shifted but never broke. The first recording made every delegate recoil. Captain Jiho's voice crackled across the chamber, young and desperate. "Proxima base to all ships. They're breaking through the outer shell. All units, full burn to intercept." The tactical display showed humanity's worst nightmare. Living ships, the size of moons, their hulls pulsing with organic life, descended on a human colony. Captain Jiho's small fleet met them head-on, ships barely a fraction of the monster's size. The battle was brutal and brief. The colony died, but the Devourers didn't advance further that day. "Admiral Jiho was 22 when he died at Proxima," Minho said quietly. "He bought us 6 months to evacuate the Mercury system." Another recording began. Admiral Yunji's final transmission echoed through the chamber. "Neptune Gate defense grid is compromised. I'm ramming the primary breach. Tell my daughter. Tell her the galaxy is worth it." The explosion tore apart both human and Devourer ships, but the gate held. "Admiral Yunji saved the outer colonies," Minho explained. "She was a grandmother. She volunteered because she said the young ones had too much life left in them." The next image silenced even the whispers. Earth hung in space, not blue and green. As ancient records showed, but burning orange and red. Atmosphere leaked away in great streamers. The continents were cratered wastelands. But still the planet fought. Earth's final day, Huna said, her young voice carrying centuries of grief. Every man, woman and child knew they would die. They chose to make it count. The recordings showed massive defense stations being built, human ships ramming into Devourer bioships, cities being evacuated while others became weapons factories, children no older than 10 working in manufacturing plants, their small hands perfect for delicate electronics work. Earth held for 53 days after the main Devourer fleet arrived, Minho said. Every minute was bought with blood. Every hour saved another colony ship full of refugees. The final recording showed a single human transmission, sent as Earth died. A child's voice, maybe 8 years old. Mum says the monsters will follow us, but Dad says we'll stop them. We'll stop them before they hurt anyone else. Admiral Minho's image dominated the screen once more. The council chamber remained absolutely silent. Even the constant hum of life support systems seemed to pause. We kept that promise, Minho said. His scarred hands gripped the edges of his command console. For 1,000 years we've kept that promise. Every human child born in the last millennium has known only war. We've forgotten what peace looks like. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. We came back because the war has followed us home. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted questions, demands, threats. But Admiral Minho just watched them, that terrible smile never leaving his face. The real conversation was just beginning. The holographic displays transformed the council chamber into a window to hell. 3-dimensional images filled the space, showing battles that spanned centuries. The delegates watched in growing horror as the true scope of humanity's war became clear. Commander Seojin's voice rang out from the archives, crystal clear, despite being recorded centuries ago. Earth base to all ships. Primary defenses are gone. Secondary grid is failing. We will buy you time. Make it count. The recording showed Earth's orbital defenses lighting up like deadly fireworks. Massive weapon platforms fired everything they had while human ships formed a ring around their dying planet. Each flash represented the death of thousands, but still they held the line. Medical Officer Sarah appeared in another hologram, her face haggard but determined. She stood in what looked like a ship's medical bay, but everything was wrong. Gravity seemed to shift randomly, and the patients floated in specialized pods. Every human child is now born in 0G, she reported to some unseen recorder. We've adapted, we've evolved. The children of the deep space fleets have bone density 30% higher than baseline human. Their cardiovascular systems are completely different. The display showed human children playing in rotating corridors, their movements fluid and graceful, in ways that would be impossible for ground dwellers. They moved like dancers, like birds, like creatures born to live among the stars. But then, the displays showed why such adaptations were necessary. The Devourer bioships filled the screens, and every delegate in the council chamber felt their stomachs lurch. These weren't machines built by some unknown species. They were alive, flesh and bone and hungry mouths that could swallow whole moons. Their hulls pulsed with veins the size of rivers. Their weapons weren't energy beams, but acidic spit that could melt through any known armor. First contact with the Devourers, Lieutenant Huna narrated. The exploration ship Magellan encountered a single scout vessel beyond the Oort cloud. The Magellan carried a crew of 300. Nothing was ever found of them. The recording showed humanity's first desperate attempts to fight. Ships designed for exploration trying to battle living nightmares. The humans lost, badly, but they learned. Captain Taman's image appeared next. A man who looked impossibly young despite his captain's uniform. He stood on a bridge that was clearly a warship, every surface scarred by battle. I was born on this ship, he said, gesturing around him. My mother died defending the Mars colonies. My father fell at the Venus Gate. This is all I've ever known. War is all I've ever known. His ship, the Defiant, was a masterpiece of brutal efficiency. It had been built from the wreckage of a Devourer bioship, its hull a patchwork of human steel and alien flesh. The weapons were hybrids too, human engineering merged with biological components taken from their enemies. We learned to fight fire. With fire, Taman continued, we learned to make the enemy's strength our own. The battle recordings that followed were beyond anything the Council could have imagined. Human fleets charged into swarms of devourer vessels, their ships spinning and weaving through space in patterns that defied physics. They used gravity as a weapon, time as a shield, and the void itself as an ally. The devourers were powerful beyond measure, but humans were clever. They were adaptable. They were desperate in ways that the devourers couldn't understand. Engineer Ayong appeared. In the final recording, her face calm despite the chaos around her. Alarms wailed in the background, and the ship shook with multiple impacts. She stood in an engine room that was more than half organic, human technology fused with captured devourer biomass. Hull breached in sections 12 through 16. Core. Overloading. Containment failure in 30 seconds. Her voice remained steady, professional, initiating final gambit. She looked directly at the camera, and her mask slipped just slightly. Behind the engineer's calm was a woman saying goodbye. "Tell my daughter that Mommy kept the monsters away. Tell them all we held the line." The explosion that followed tore apart both her ship and the devourer vessel it was ramming. But in the aftermath, 3 colony ships full of refugees jumped safely to hyperspace. The displays faded, leaving the council chamber in shocked silence. The delegates had witnessed 1,000 years of sacrifice, innovation born from desperation, and evolution driven by extinction. Admiral Minho's weathered face reappeared on the main screen. "We've shown you our past. Now let us show you our present." The Inheritance's hull opened like a flower made of steel and starlight. Launch bays revealed fleets of smaller vessels, each one bearing the scars of countless battles. Marines stood in formation, their armor a seamless blend of human engineering and alien technology. "This is what we've become," Minho said quietly. "We are no longer the species that first reached for the stars. We are what we had to become to survive." The council members looked at each other with growing understanding and fear. Humanity hadn't just survived. They had transformed themselves into something new, something forged by war into the perfect weapon, and now they had come home. The silence in the council chamber stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Every delegate seemed frozen in place, still processing what they had witnessed. The recordings had ended, but the images of burning worlds and desperate sacrifice lingered in everyone's mind. Admiral Minho's scarred face dominated the central display. He waited patiently, letting the weight of his words sink in. Time meant nothing to a man who had measured his life in battles won and lost. "The devourer fleets have followed us home," he said finally, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "They'll reach council space within 5 years." The chamber erupted in dozens of different languages. Delegates shouted questions, curses and prayers. The Kessuthul collective split into 1,000 arguing voices. The Xanathi's energy fields crackled with distress. Science Officer Yeji stepped forward, her uniform bearing the medals of 12 campaigns. She looked impossibly young for someone who carried such knowledge, but her eyes held the same weary wisdom as every human present. "We've tracked their movement through deep space," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We estimate 40,000 bioships in the lead wave alone. That's just what we can detect. There may be millions more behind them." Delegate Crix finally found her voice, the crystal being's words chiming with desperate hope. "Surely you can stop them. You've held them back for 1,000 years." The bitter laugh that escaped Admiral Minho was like breaking glass. "We've held them. Barely. Every year we lose more ships than we build. Every battle we sacrifice more than we save." He leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "We're losing, Council. We've been losing for centuries." Young delegate, some species the humans didn't recognize, stood trembling. "Then why come to us now? Why reveal yourselves after all this time?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Around the chamber, the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds waited for an answer. Some showed fear, others anger, many simple confusion. "Because dying alone achieves nothing," Minho said quietly. His smile held no warmth, no comfort. It was the smile of a man who had made the hardest choice possible. "We've bought you 1,000 years of peace. Now we ask you to join the war we've already been fighting." The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was different. This was the silence of understanding. of terrible, dawning comprehension. The Vithtar delegate pressed all 6 of her hands to the table. "You've been protecting us. All this time, you've been protecting us." "We've been protecting everyone," Lieutenant Huna added, her young face hard as stone. "Every trade route that runs on schedule, every colony that sleeps safely at night, every child that grows up knowing only peace. We died for it all." Behind Admiral Minho, the Inheritance's massive weapons began to power up. The sound was like thunder contained in metal, a promise of destruction that dwarfed anything in the Council's arsenal. But there was no threat in the gesture. This was demonstration, not intimidation. "Watch carefully," Minho said as the main guns charged. "This is what war looks like." The Inheritance fired a single shot into empty space. The energy beam wasn't visible to the naked eye, but sensors tracked its path as it struck a distant asteroid. The rock didn't just explode, it simply ceased. To exist, every atom torn apart and scattered to the void. "One shot," Yeji explained calmly. "Range 12 light minutes. Power consumption, equivalent to a small star's daily output." The delegates stared at their readouts in stunned silence. The Inheritance wasn't just a warship, it was a weapon that could crack planets. "This is what we've become," Minho said, standing slowly. "We are no longer the pleasant little species that sent trade delegations and tourist groups. We are what war made us, what necessity forced us to become." He gestured to the bridge around him, where officers worked with deadly efficiency. "Every person on this ship was born knowing they would die in battle. We've forgotten what it means to hope for old age. We've forgotten what it means to die in peace." The transformation was complete. The boy from Earth had become humanity's shield, carrying the weight of 1,000 years of war. But now the shield was cracking, and the galaxy would have to learn what lay behind it. Minho's voice carried absolute certainty. "The war is coming home. You can join us and have a chance to survive. Or you can wait alone and be devoured in by one." The council chamber filled with the sound of 100 species whispering prayers, curses, and desperate plans. But in the end, there was only one choice. The galaxy would stand together, or it would fall apart. Behind Admiral Minho, the Inheritance's engines began to hum, ready for war, ready for whatever came next.